All right, 2/3 of the way through it, guys. The last thing I want to talk about in this module is how to document supervision and fieldwork. This again can be quite confusing to learn, but as you start to use this system, it will become more fluent and easier to use with time. The first part of your documentation includes a unique documentation system. Because your experiences may vary widely from your peers, it's acceptable to use a UDS or unique documentation system that is specific to your on-site experience. However, when beginning to develop your UDS, you'll want to use this table on page 7 to make sure that you have hit all of the requirements for that documentation. Independent hours have slightly different requirements than supervised hours. So if you are working an independent hour, your unique documentation system should at minimum include the date of those independent hours, the start time and end type, the fieldwork type, the setting name, the supervisor name, and whether the activity was restricted or unrestricted. You'll also want to give a brief description of what you did and may want to include how it ties to the 5th edition task list. If you are doing a supervised hour of fieldwork, you need to document each contact, and you also need to make sure that they have the following requirements: the date, start time, and end time, the format. Did you meet in person or did you meet over some kind of Google Hangout or video online? The type of fieldwork you're doing, whether the supervision was provided as an individual or as a group, and whether the activity that you are documenting is restricted or unrestricted. You want to also describe the summary of a supervision activity. This would include feedback provided and task list items that you discussed. It may also be helpful to go back up to your list of supervised activities and responsibilities and make sure that what you're documenting falls under a category that's been approved. Finally, the unique documentation system must also be able to document each month the total number of hours of individual and group supervision, the total number of supervisor contacts, and the total number of direct observations of you working with the trainee. Some people like to have this done in one large document, such as an Excel spreadsheet that includes a page for monthly documentation, a page logging independent hours, and a page logging supervised hours. Others prefer to have a different Word-based document or printout for supervised hours that they can go over and fill out with their supervisor when present, and logging their independent hours on a different Word-based document. This can get a little bit hairy, so you'll want to make sure that however you choose to do your UDS, you have all of these requirements met each month and that it is accessible to you and your supervisors. These unique documentation systems are also separate from the remaining documentation. So you'll notice that some of the next documentation we talk about might hit some of these requirements, but your UDS needs to be able to do everything on this nice table here independently of those other documents. So once you develop your UDS, you can begin to log your hours and should check in frequently at the beginning with both your faculty and on-site supervisor to make sure that your UDS is in fact meeting each of these requirements. The next set of documentation you need to be familiar with are your fieldwork forms. These are often called EVFs, and there are 2 types, although each type is different for both multiple and individual supervisors and settings. The first fieldwork verification form is a monthly fieldwork verification form. The monthly EVF is available on the BACB website and must be signed within the following calendar month when the hours were accrued. If students accrue hours in January, the last day in which the monthly fieldwork verification form can be signed is February 28th or 29th on the right year. It's very important that you keep up with when your supervisor signs this. If you are having difficulty getting a hold of them, if someone goes on vacation, you'll want to make sure that you get this documentation signed within the following month, or you may not be able to count the hours accrued in the month that it documents. The final fieldwork verification form, or the final EVF, is what you'll actually submit to the BACB when you apply for your exam. The final fieldwork verification form documents your entire fieldwork experience, and we suggest completing one at the end of each supervisory experience. So fieldwork 1, 2, 3, and 4 may each have final EVFs. Two versions of each form are available, as we discussed, and all four separate forms are available on the BACB website. One thing that can make meeting these deadlines easier is that there is an acceptable signature policy by the BACB that allows you to get an electronic signature in the case that you and your supervisor aren't able to meet in the following month. Make sure you review the signature policy before completing that activity so that, again, all of your fieldwork forms succinctly and explicitly meet the requirements in this document. There are also some really nice optional resources here that I want to discuss quickly. The fieldwork checklist and tip sheet gives you some kind of FAQs and also helps you plan out your experience as you start to digest and really learn how to use your UDS and meet these multiple requirements. The fieldwork tracker is technically optional, but it does have to be produced if you're audited by the BACB. So while it says optional, in our fieldwork and concentrated fieldwork courses, we require students to also document their hours using the fieldwork tracker. The fieldwork tracker is also updated frequently, and you'll get notifications from the BACB about those updates. The fieldwork tracker is probably the one that looks like the most duplicative of these documentation systems because most of the things on the fieldwork tracker are also somewhere else in either your UDS, monthly, or final EVFs. But the fieldwork tracker is separate, so you need to make sure that the UDS still meets those bulleted requirements without having to go access the fieldwork tracker. In the case of an audit, the process looks like this. The BACB will request documentation from you. It could include the supervision contract itself, the trainee and the supervisor's UDS, the monthly fieldwork verification forms, and the fieldwork tracker. You only have 7 days to submit this documentation, which is why we require you to do the fieldwork tracker. Just think about accruing 2,000 hours and then having 7 days to go back and figure out what time your individual supervision hours started the first week of fieldwork. It would be quite challenging. So keeping up with all of these extra documentation pieces will help you be confident that if you are to be audited, when you submit that requested documentation, the BACB reviews it. Your feedback will be that all of your requirements have been met and you are eligible for the exam. The Fieldwork Requirements Standards document also has a glossary of terms that can be helpful, especially when you go back to think about what's the difference between independent hours and observation with a client, or what are fieldwork verification forms. I've only heard them called EVFs. Be sure that you take a peek at these glossary of terms. If you're doing SAF meds, it wouldn't be a bad idea to make some off of these. Again, you want these criteria to be really, really fluent so that you can work on meeting the ultimate goal of supervision, which is to enhance your practice and become more capable as a BCBA and a supervisor, rather than just spending your 2,000 hours figuring out how to document your time. Let's stop and do one more knowledge check, and then we can come back and make sure that we've got a good introduction to what these fieldwork standards are and how they apply to the documentation that you'll be required to do as part of your experience.